Alrighty, we have launched. Alrighty. Welcome, everybody. Planet Green Trees. For those of you who may have been asking what the guy with the deep voice is talking about, currently listening to Planet Green Trees. We are Michigan's premier medical cannabis and cannabis reform radio show. So our intent is maybe many of you've witnessed or played witness to to provide you week in and week out the most up-to-date, useful, informative, educational, newsworthy, and enlightening perspective on the politics, cultural, social, and legal issues currently affecting the community in Michigan, both nationally and internationally. That's what we do. We've been doing it now for approximately 194 episodes and then some. And I think our show, if anything, has been able to provide a relatively clear outline of the roadmap of how the implementation of the voter initiative has taken place. But that's what we do, and to help us do this every week alongside of me, to bring you all of that is Chad from the Birmingham Compassion Club.
Good evening. It's nice to be here.
The editor-in-chief of the Compassion Chronicles and the one and only news anchor for Planet Green Trees, Rick Thompson.
Good evening, everyone.
The producer and person responsible for putting together the guests every week that we can claim is the most up-to-date and informative discussion, Jamie Lowell from Third Coast Compassion.
Hello.
And joining us this week, Beck again. We didn't get to talk enough about his case last week, and we probably won't have enough time this week either, but we keep teasing it because a lot of people listening want to hear about this. David Radoy of Radoy Law. David, thanks for being here.
Always happy to be in the studio.
And, of course, today is April 10th, 2014. Call number is 1-347-326-9626. For those of you listening by the phone, you can listen to the show on a computer at www.planetgreentrees.com. And we have several archived shows, more than 194 somewhere, that are worth a listen to here and there if you want to get caught up on what's been happening in Michigan. Tonight, though, very special show. We're calling it the Plan for Legalization in 2014 and the Hash Bash Review, Hash Bash number 43. And to start in a little while, we're going to have a call in from on this issue that this past week or so, the statewide 2014 local ballot initiative for decriminalization and legalization were announced. The cities who will lay the flag of prohibition reform will be Lapeer, Bay City, Utica, Hazel Park, Oak Park, Clair, Harrison, Onaway, Benzie County, not just the city, the entire county, East Lansing, Mount Pleasant, and Port Huron. I wonder how many cities are in Benzie County that we can add to the entirety of it. Calling in to discuss their undefeated record and the philosophy behind this strategy will be, I know sometimes he admits he's a fan of the show, the godfather of marijuana in Michigan, the one and only Tim Beck, and also the 40-year cannabis reform activist and self-proclaimed kindergarten teacher, the one and only Chuck Reem. And I keep threatening we're going to have an entire show devoted to Chuck and his views on all this. But we are going to be talking about that because that is what's happening as we move towards a better future. Also, we're going to be discussing Hash Bash. As many of you know, this last weekend, Hash Bash number 43 is come and gone, and we're going to be recapping the events, the speakers. We're going to have calls from the event organizers to discuss essentially the impact the event has had historically and what this past event, where it stands out in the history of it, and what impact it's really had on affecting the cannabis prohibition reform. Also, one of the real themes that we used to get more of back in the 0 to 100 episodes were the patient testimonials. It is unequivocal that the story of the patient needs to be told, and when we have a courageous person who wants to come on air and discuss how, in fact, cannabis is helping or hurting or in whatever way it may be affecting their debilitating condition, we welcome it. And tonight, very courageous cancer patient Sandra Hanes will be calling in to discuss whether and how hurts of cannabis has impacted treatment for cancer, whether it's been effective or not, and discuss some of the things. I'm going to rant in a little while, but I do want a couple of shout-outs of our sponsors. I give big thanks to my good friend Dewey. I had a busy week this week, so get your rest for tomorrow, at least office work. Pam, thanks for all you're doing, keeping in line with things. I want to give a shout-out to the Michigan Medical Marijuana Association, michiganmedicalmarijuana.org. I thank moderators and administrators for volunteer time, making that forum a safe and comfortable environment for the community to learn and evolve the conversation of medical cannabis. Komorn Law 1-800-656-3557. The Marijuana Rancher, call 313-422-5281 for your tour of the Historical Cultural Center maintained there. You can read reviews about that at the Birmingham Compassion Club. Big shout out to our good friend Dr. Kumar Singh at Green Light Clinic, 248-390-0574. Dr. Singh, as many of you hear me speak about, I would say is in line with the conformity of what has been taking place in Michigan in attacking the doctor-patient relationship, and as we say, week in and week out. And we'd even add to that rant because of this obsession to make this point that hotel certifications are simply not going to be satisfactory should you need to defend yourself for any reason in court, and just the mention of such will leave you without a medical marijuana defense. Instead, go to a doctor who has reformed themselves and conformed themselves to the demands of the Michigan Medical Marijuana and the amendments. Also, I think it's episodes 85 through 90 where we discuss in great detail and have different doctors calling and discussing the importance of this in a proper protocol. I want to shout out to our good friends of the community, Bob and Tori Redden. Our thoughts are with you. I know Tori's going through a terrible time right now and spending time in hospice. She's not doing well after her cancer has come back. So we wish our best to Bob and Tori. Also, Eric Gunnels, our good friend from Thetford Township, Genesee County, chairman of the steering committee for a couple groups. And I think those are the shout-outs for right now. All right, so we're going
to rant about something good.
Right. Well, there's always so much to talk about, and law is ever changing, and I like to give my spin on things both from a legal, cultural, and social perspective. And before I get to that, I did want to mention I understand that Editor-in-Chief Rick Thompson of the Compassion Chronicles is prepared for the next few weeks to gather and help in the promotion of show number 200 of Planet Green Trees.
Yes.
We're going to have a blowout, and we're going to try to get as many listeners as we can and give whatever thanks back to those that have been following us and listening and contributing to any reason why we would continue to do this at all, week after week. But I do want to discuss it. We're going to set a date, and producer Jamie is going to be having all kinds of special guests and super promotions. I don't even recognize you. Your haircut. All right, so there's the trials and tribulations of the court experience, which we can always rant about. And I think that last week in particular, I can refer to a couple of incidents. I did have an interesting case today, which I want to discuss, search warrant issue. Some listeners that follow this may be interested, and I'll just tell this tale. For right now, we can call it my rant. But many people were very disappointed in the ruling of People versus Anthony Miller. What case is that? What are we talking about? What's that case about? Did I miss that one? Well, People versus Anthony Miller is a case that addressed a very important issue in Michigan, which is when police officers are getting a search warrant for a house that they suspect marijuana to be in, which is illegal in Michigan. According to the Supreme Court, marijuana is still illegal. And in limited instances, an individual may be exempt from being treated as if it's illegal and be immune from such arrest or prosecution. But very clearly, over and over and over again, we've heard the Supreme Court and Court of Appeals reiterate that the Michigan Medical Marijuana did not legalize medical marijuana. Marijuana is still legal, except for these limited instances. So when they address this issue of what impact does the acquisition of a search warrant have in articulating in an affidavit the probable cause necessary to present to a magistrate, that the magistrate would make a finding that a search warrant should be issued. And to back up a second, the legal procedure or protocol is that an officer who's investigating for whatever reasons, they're drawn to a suspicion or alleged behavior, and there's different ways in which they may receive the information. For example, there's a person that could call and say, hey, it's me. My name is Attorney David Verdoy, and I want to give you some information about some stuff that I know that's going on there. Then when the investigating officer or the affiant states the name of the person, they're named, and it changes the additional information that may be required in the search warrant, or affidavit, I should say, to establish the probable cause. Because the individual is given the information is named, and if they're speaking with personal knowledge, these statements that are made or the averments in the affidavit are what are utilized to support the probable cause. There's also scenarios where the individual that's offering the information, the tipster, the snitch, the CI, confidential informant, where they're unnamed. And when those situations happen, there's additional requirements that the magistrate must look for in the affidavit, specifically that the unnamed tipster, CI, spoke with personal knowledge of the circumstances, and further that the tipster is known to be reliable, or that the information provided by the tipster is reliable. And the way for the affiant or investigating officer to do that is to then go out with the information that has been given by the unnamed tipster, in the case that I'm speaking about, and try to corroborate the information given by the unnamed tipster, so that they can then in some way try to confirm the accuracy or reliability of the information given by some unnamed person. In other words, the purpose and intent of this, although I think the threshold should be much higher when you're talking about the Fourth Amendment, the analysis that's used is we don't want a neighbor being able to call the police and say, but because they personally hate them, or they've got some issue over some tree that wasn't cut, or hedge that's not cut properly, or their dogs urinating on their lawn or whatever, and they hate the neighbor, and they call the police and say, oh, blah blah, I'm unnamed, I don't want to be known, and this person's got 14 pounds of cocaine in the garage, I saw it, but I'm not telling you who I am. And the idea then is that in that situation, unnamed person, they don't know if they're reliable, they can't state that they're reliable, and they've been given information that they cannot say is reliable until they go out and corroborate it. In the case I speak of, it's relative to this People versus Anthony Brown, and let me return to that so you can understand the significance of the case I speak of. Anthony Brown was a case that addressed the issue of when officers gather probable cause, and in the Anthony Brown case, they did a trash pull. They found marijuana. I think they did a pull on the electrical, and there was giving indications of higher than normal voltage. And whatever the case is, they went and they got a affidavit, filled it out, took it to the magistrate, and presented it and said, sign this warrant. And magistrate did, because he found that there was probable cause, and he looked at it and said, okay, you got marijuana is illegal, and there's no reference to anything medical. They raid, they search, and they seize, and what have you. And the defense attorneys argued that this is Michigan now. The world has changed. That if before a police officer executes a search warrant, they should determine whether or not there is caregiving that's taking place in the location. So we have this standoff of the issue is what impact is the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act going to have on probable cause? In other words, there's a threshold that a magistrate would evaluate the information that are being provided in the four corners of the affidavit to determine whether or not the United States and Michigan Constitution's Fourth Amendment protection against government unlawful searches and seizures, they are giving the ticket to step over those constitutional protections. So there's specific rules. And in People versus Anthony Brown, the Court of Appeals said marijuana is still legal, and no officer should have to go out and determine specifically whether or not there's a medical marijuana patient or caregiver activity that's going on inside. However, there's a very interesting footnote in paragraph. There's a very interesting footnote in the case that I'm going to read to you, which applies in our case, and that I'm going to speak of here. But the what is said in that case is that scroll through. Well, they talk about the footnote 5 of People versus Anthony Brown. While we decline in light of the pertinent case law to impose an affirmative duty on police to obtain information pertaining to a person's non-compliance with the MMA before seeking a search warrant for marijuana, if the police do have a clear and uncontroverted evidence that a person is in full compliance with the MMA, this evidence must be included as part of the affidavit because such a situation would not justify the issuance of a warrant. This scheme will reduce any potential, however unlikely, for police overreach in attempting to obtain search warrants. So what they say is we're not making it, there's no requirement of police officers to go out and determine in every situation whether or not there is medical marijuana, which would seemingly suggest that the public health code violation of growing marijuana in someone's house would be excludable or excusable or not a crime. So that's not a requirement. However, if the police know, they can't ignore it, and they have to include it in the warrant because when it's included, there's no way in the world there should be a warrant that is issued, essentially, what they're saying. And if they know that they're in compliance and they include that in the warrant, then simply put, there should not be a warrant, and there wouldn't be an overreach, but they can't ignore it. So the case that I have is, the case that directly addresses this, where the tipster's information provided to the affiant, the investigating officer, was my client was a medical marijuana caregiver who was expanding his grow to plants in an account that was more than he was allowed to have. And the second piece of the information given was that they, in fact, was moving the expanded grow to the garage or attic, which is a separate area than the house. And with this information, questioning whether it's reliable or not, the investigating officer, who's later the affiant, goes out to try to corroborate it. And he finds, by looking at the house at this location, that the window is, as he states it, blackened out with a white shade. In other words, he had a shade like anyone else in any other house. But as he states in his affidavit, this is commonplace in marijuana growing. I know this because I'm well-trained and I'm smart and I'm a drug trafficking superstar investigator, hound dog. And he then goes on to say, and there's a whole other show we could do about this, about parallel reconstruction, but they unlawfully and by circumventing state law then get the TTE records of my client and indicate that they are, in the affidavit, they are higher than the average home, without giving a definition of what the average home is, or even giving a definition of what the size of this home is, or even give an explanation that they know that there's at least 6,500 square footage of property that is being used by the electrical energy that's being paid for in the bill that they're looking at. So, in short, the information here in this case of probable cause that is being gathered is that the medical marijuana caregiver who is over his plant count, who is expanding this grow to the garage and attic, and the confirmation of information that's gotten by the investigation is that the window is blackened out and they have a high electrical bill. Now, we litigated this case for a couple of weeks. We had a couple of hearings today, and in fact, the judge, His Honor Shiawase, made a finding that the search warrant should be quashed because there is not probable cause in that situation. That in fact, the information that's given of the lawful caregiving, as I argued, would be expected to have materials that are associated with the growing of marijuana because that's what a caregiver does. And unless you can determine in some way that they're over, you're really not corroborating the information that's given. Unless you can determine how many plants they're allowed to have, you can't corroborate whether they're over their plant count that would warrant illegal behavior. I argued today, and the judge agreed with me, that the only information that seems to be clear is that the person is a medical marijuana caregiver who either is currently or is planning on moving their grow to the garage to increase the number of plants beyond what they have, confirming that they have a high electrical bill and confirming that the house, not even the area where the expanded grow is supposed to be, as a shade, doesn't confirm anything. What was interesting, and we're going to relitigate some of these other issues, was an issue of good faith and bad faith of the police officers, that they, while they got the electrical bills and maintained that those houses were, that house was using more energy than a normal house, whatever that means, and without a definition of what a normal house is, whatever that means, failed to state at all under oath and omitted this, that the electrical bill is actually going down. That if you look back at the trend of since January to the time in which they got the records of May or June of 2013, the electrical outage had gone down, which was a very, very misleading issue. But as we analyze the Constitution of Michigan and the United States and all the cases that have applied for these search warrants, we got to that issue of the Medical Marijuana Act and the requirements of law enforcement when they know about the lawful caregiving. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens as other cases go forward and how honest officers are going to be about providing that information. I think that the officer was acting in limited good faith when they made that statement, but I think thought it, by its statement itself, would somehow lend itself to some negative, probable cause for the overall totality of the circumstances. But anyways, point of the story is that, as the judge said, there's new contemplation to this law. He kept saying this is a case that came after the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act. All of these other cases that addressed this issue came before. And I like that from this judge because he did have a good perspective on how these things are to be analyzed and did, in fact, apply the law to the case, and it resulted in a very, very positive result. And it's good when you know that the law works and the system that we all want to believe in can work, and it should encourage people, not just discourage people, that the system can work, and participation in the program should not, would not be in vain. And these cards actually do mean something when litigated properly. All right, so that's the rant for right now. We got a lot of wild stuff to get to tonight. And caller number is 1-347-326-9626. Do we have a chat room open? Is that what I understand, or is that not a thing yet? Producers?
Do we have a chat room open on the MMA?
There is.
All right, so we're taking chat, sponsored by Chat of the Birmingham Compassion Club. David Radoy assisting in answering legal questions, screening. If you want to go there, MichiganMedicalMarijuana.org. So it is. And I want to hear from you. We're going to talk about decrim and the strategy of how this is going to be something we're not going to have a show to talk about in 2016. Let's get her done. We'll be right back.